Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto World. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Naruto Uzumaki. Things weren't going so well, it seemed. No shit, what was your first clue? The Kyuubi drawled from inside his mind, the whole situation bothering it about as much as Naruto expected. Which is to say it didn't, at all. Good to know you aren't a complete fool. Which was stupid, in Naruto's opinion. Of course, he knew by then that even if he died, the Kyuubi would be fine, sort of. From what the fox bastard had said, he'd just reform. However, Naruto would bet that it wouldn't be a very pleasant experience though. Probably not, the chakra beast replied. But what can you do, your days are counted, brat. If it's even days and not just hours. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Naruto thought back, even if a small, pushed to the side part of him agreed. His chances weren't looking so good. That only meant he had to find a way to improve them though. That, however, could be a little troublesome, admittedly. If IG had made sure of one thing as of late, it was that Naruto knew very well how dangerous Akatsuki could be. His brother had filled his head with all the knowledge he could possibly need to deal with them. What they looked like, what they might be able to do, even some bits and pieces of their personalities. He'd given Naruto all the tools he could possibly need, or as many as IG could manage, that is. Yet, there he was. The only allies he had in Suna, the siblings, had gone away to some very important meeting that he wasn't privy to. That meant that chances were he would have no backup besides, maybe, the fox. Granted, Suna Ninja seemed to be decent enough and they didn't hate his guts like the civilians in Konoha did, but they'd never stand a chance against these S-ranked ninja. Thus, Naruto had done his best to put seals and traps everywhere. Especially when he heard that the Suna siblings were going away and he wouldn't be able to move back to Konoha. He'd thought, back then, that maybe being attacked wouldn't be that bad. He was confident in his skills, after all, and he thought it was possible he might even be able to deal with them. With some luck he might even deal with them, in a way that would see them permanently not being a problem. He'd been delusional, evidently. Evidently the Kyuubi repeated his thoughts unhelpfully. God, he could be annoying. You are one to talk. That didn't matter, what mattered was finding a way out of his situation before it was too late. The Akatsuki pair had dealt with everything he'd laid out against them. Torn through it all like it was a particularly weak piece of clothing or something, instead of the impenetrable armor he'd thought it to be. Shields were pierced, traps were avoided, explosions were pushed through. Nothing could stop them, and Naruto soon found out that there was no way he'd be fighting these people and winning. He liked to test the odds, to give it his all for that one single miraculous chance. He'd always been like that. However, Naruto knew what a lost cause looked like. Even worse, he couldn't, for the life of him, find a way to give himself the slightest of chances. There was nothing he could do from where he was, hidden under the strongest shield he'd managed to put up, powering it with the chakra of the Kyuubi, piece of shit that it was. Outside, the Akatsuki members were attacking. It seemed they'd come for round 2, as it were. Sasuke's crazy-ass brother and the living sword dude were certainly annoying. Especially the latter one, if Naruto were honest. That sword that could eat chakra was really messing up all his seals. As it was, at that very moment, the weapon was slowly eating away at the energy that powered his shield. Seconds trickled by and they were closer and closer to getting to him. Naruto's eyes darted around. Surely there was a way for him to get away. Except that there wasn't. He'd tried a bunch of things already. Put up a shield like he had and blow everything up once he got them close. No, that had only gotten him torn clothes, stinging wounds and nothing else. He'd also tried to battle. He'd pulled the shadow clones that Ig had taught him, all with seal armor on, and battled it out. The pair had made him look like they were a small army of civilian kids trying to fight a Jounin or something. It was pathetic. Indeed it was, the Kyuubi commented. Why won't you help me, you oversized fur ball? Naruto all but screamed in his mind. Because I can't, you infuriating brat, the chakra beast said then, its annoyance bleeding into the words. I could give you more chakra, but what good would that do? Even if I gave you all my chakra and what that would entail, we are unlikely to win. That sounded like it hurt to say, Naruto pointed out. What little hopes he had were all but dashed by the creature's words. The growl he got in response was somewhat justified, he supposed. Both of them were annoyed and scared. I'm not scared. Not sure what you are trying to accomplish, brat, the freak with the even freakier sword commented as his weapon continued eating his shield's chakra. You aren't gonna get away from here, that's for sure. Well, I'm not trying to look at your ugly mug even more than I need to, that's for sure, Naruto shot back with a snarl. He continued looking around, pleading for something to give him an idea. There had to be something. There had to be a way. Accept it, you are done, the swordsman told him with that half-amused half-pitying look that grated on the blonde's nerves. What he wouldn't give to be able to blow up his entire stupid face. At this point you are just being annoying. I'm told I'm good at that, the blonde replied with a grin. Don't I know it, Kyuubi muttered at the back of his mind, but Naruto ignored it. So, I'll keep it up, if it's all the same to you. It's really not. Too bad, I guess. Even through the exchange, Naruto's mind kept working, kept searching. There had to be something. Time was passing, days were passing, and help wasn't coming. His chakra was slowly but surely being drained as he tried to maintain his defense up. Even with the Kyuubi supplying more of the stuff, they'd both run out eventually. It was only fortunate that the shield was preventing the sword from just eating up all his and the Kyuubi's chakra much faster. Suddenly, Naruto knew how this pair was supposed to take down what was basically a natural disaster turned into a weapon. Exhaustion. Well, it was good knowing you, brat. Or not, really, the fox said then, and he resisted the urge to roll his eyes. You could have been worse, I guess. Same common, Naruto thought, his shoulders dropping. Was that it? After all his struggles, after everything he'd gone through. Was that how he'd end? In the middle of nowhere, alone. Fitting, in a way, he mused, not even sad. He was more disappointed. If nothing else, he'd wanted his life to end differently than how it had started. Or how he remembered it starting. Naruto had always been alone, when he was younger. As he grew, he made friends, he formed a new family for himself, he got a girlfriend. Life was looking up, he'd even started looking forward to the future. A future in which he had even more people to love and that loved him. A future in which he wouldn't be alone. But there he was, by himself. As the reality of his situation started settling in, Naruto thought about all that he regretted. He thought of those things that he'd wanted and would never get. And, maybe surprisingly for other people, he didn't think about the fact that he hadn't made Hokage. That was the furthest thought from his mind. I wish I could see Hinata again, he thought to himself. How he hated that it had taken him so long to realize that the girl cared so much for him. The one girl that had given him a chance and truly looked at him. That small family he'd sometimes imagined would never happen now, it seemed. I wish I could see IG again, he thought, knowing that his brother would blame himself for this. So much work was put into making sure Naruto was safe, and all that had been for nothing. The blonde lamented that loss, but not as much as he lamented that his kids and Iges would never play together. I wish I could see everyone else again, he continued, thinking about the rest of the group. He'd sometimes fantasize about his friends and him when passing by a bar or such, back when his life was duller, sadder. He'd imagine what it would be like, to be there with friends of his own, sharing tales of old missions and memories made together. But he'd never get the chance to do that. All right, brat, the Kyuubi said, and if he hadn't known better, Naruto would have thought its voice sounded softer. This is ridiculous. How about we both go out with a bang, yeah? Naruto chuckled to himself, drawing curious looks from both Akatsuki. From what he could tell, don't look at Itachi's eyes, ever, Naruto IG had told him. Inside him, chakra coursed, too warm for comfort. Not quite burning him, but it was certainly uncomfortable. He could put up with that much though. You know what, Fox, Naruto replied, feeling the shift in his body. His eyes grew sharper and he knew they were now red and slitted. His nails and fangs lengthened and sharpened. His hair grew wilder, swaying with the wind generated by the energy overflowing from him. Let's do it. The Akatsuki shifted, clearly seeing the attack coming. That was fine. More chakra was given to him and his coils started burning, but that was fine too. The cloak around him grew denser and denser. What was once a reddish mist became a bubbling, much more solid veil. It didn't stop there, though. On his head, the energy shaped 2 ears, not unlike those of his partner and tenant. Behind him, the chakra formed a tail, and then 2, and then 3, and then it kept going. Kurama the fox all but whispered. My name is Kurama, kid. Well, Kurama, Naruto started, already feeling his emotions growing more erratic, more wild, with every passing second and every bit of chakra that was fed to him. Let's see how much we can make them hurt, shall we? The cloak grew even denser, so much so that Naruto's body almost couldn't even be seen, but the Kyuubi kept going. More and more tails appeared until they stopped appearing. After all, he already had 9. Took the words right out of my mouth, brat. Akatsuki had already jumped away, but that was hardly all that inconvenient. The shield around Naruto came down, the drain on his reserves going with it. Instantly afterwards, he rushed them. They'd come to hunt him, the least they could do was fight him. Clones appeared, all of them just as filled with chakra as he was. He wouldn't be able to use his seals, but that was, unfortunately, for the best. It had become obvious that they couldn't do much against this pair. Or the shark guy, at the very least. That one could disrupt whatever he set up too easily with his stupid sword. The hard way it is, Naruto thought as he dashed towards one of them. His clones divide themselves, choosing one of the two and focusing on him. Maybe he could win, maybe he couldn't, but one thing was for certain. He wouldn't go down without fighting, believe it. Oh. Ig Sata. Kage and Hakai remained silent as he flickered again, and again, and again, without stopping even for half a second. He felt their presence, right there, as if they were about to speak or about to take control. That was all they did though. They never said anything or so much as tried to move any part of his body or his chakra. If IG was honest, he wasn't sure if they were trying to be comforting or if they were getting ready for a fight. Either way, they didn't explain themselves either, so he wondered if it was both. He didn't have much time for those idle thoughts, however. No, instead, he needed to go faster, push harder. Akatsuki was at Suna and they were hunting Naruto. Taking into account the time a message would have taken to be delivered all the way to Iwa, things weren't looking good, that was for sure. That didn't matter though, he'd save his brother or so help him, IG would raise the world to the ground. What happened to the spider's eye set in Suna, damn it? He cursed to himself. Sachigumo wasn't helping all that much to keep his calm. The chakra beast was angry, to say the least. In another bout of almost inconsequential thoughts, at least as far as the situation at hand was concerned, IG wondered if she was angry because Naruto was in danger or because IG himself was angry. He had never had the chance to truly introduce her to anyone just yet, so if she even cared about anyone, it was because of the things he'd told her. IG had, obviously, spoken at length about his chosen family and his friends. To the point that he guessed the young chakra beast probably cared about them to some extent. However, the undrilled fury that overflowed him through their connection was certainly a little over what he'd have expected. It was definitely his own emotions getting the better of her. At that point, that was fine. IG didn't much care for where this wave of extreme support came from. He and his mind occupants could worry about if this was a bad influence on the young thing after his brother was safe. As it was, he was grateful for the influx of chakra and power that were given to him. The landscapes blurred as he leaped again and again, his body flicker taking him further. Maybe it was a fool's errand, but he had to try. He'd never forgive himself if he didn't try to get to Naruto. The what if would always eat at him and he knew it. And if there was the slightest chance, then he had to take it. Naruto, his brother, was a resourceful little shit. If anyone could stall Akatsuki for a few days, it was him. IG could imagine the blonde, setting up traps and cackling as his would-be attackers struggled to get past, more amused than worried. If only he thought to himself. Come on, he urged his body. Just a little faster, just a little further, he pleaded. His legs burned, not only because of the exertion but because of the insane amount of chakra that was being coursed through them. World Ender had to work overtime just to keep them from breaking apart with the frankly crazy number of flickers he'd already gone through and would likely go through in the future. Sachigumo was a godsend and he would forever be grateful for her. IG wasn't sure how much he was eating from her reserves, but it couldn't be a small amount, even for a chakra beast. It was a shame that with their need to keep her secret, they'd never been able to test her limits. She still has plenty, don't worry, Hakai mumbled, almost as if she were afraid to speak. She needn't have worried. IG might be feeling his wrath burn a hole in his chest, but he knew very well who was deserving of it and who wasn't. When he got his hands on Akatsuki, he swore to God that he'd. Are we going to use simultaneous control? Kij asked, and IG was very sure that it was to keep him focused. To stop him from spiraling into a bloodthirsty frenzy. He was grateful for it, even if he was also annoyed. Let's not. I'm not sure how well I can work with you guys like I am right now, he muttered, as if he were pushing the words through his teeth, even if he was speaking in his own mind. The two mind dwellers receded a little after that. IG couldn't help it, he was just so angry, worried, afraid. All of those emotions filled him, burned and froze him. He'd been so close to getting everything he wanted. He was practically touching world peace. Akatsuki was halfway done and he was getting progressively stronger. His preparations were going well too, in that regard. And now Naruto could be dead any moment. That boy that had dragged him to eat ramen and decided that it was a good time to change how he viewed life and his goals. That boy that had probably saved him from being alone and drowning himself in training and paranoia. That boy had suffered so much and still came out half decent. The boy he'd practically raised. The ground under his feet cracked. The next step pushed the dirt down. The next one left a small crater. I need to go faster, Ig urged himself once more. A picture of Naruto's wide smile appeared in his mind. Faster, he repeated, and the flickers started taking less time and went further. Chakra moved even faster, burning his body even more, but that wasn't important. If you are going to be the next Hokage, then I'm going to be the next Shinobi no Kami. We aren't there yet, Naruto Ig thought to himself, as if his brother could hear him. You can't die yet. Don't make me a liar. Don't make me go back on my word. He wasn't even sure where he was at that moment, but what he knew was that he still hadn't reached Naruto. Crossed the border into the land of wind, I think Hakai told him, and that made sense. The colors of the passing landscape were turning more and more yellow as he moved. The ground under started being sand instead of dirt. That was as much as he could tell, but that was all that he needed to know. He was moving on a straight line to Suna, after all. Hakai, Kage and liberal use of web sense was enough to keep him on track and prevent him from veering off route. Once there, it'd be child's play to find Naruto, he'd just have to follow the trail of destruction. Hell, there had to be Sunanin around that he could ask. Or ask if they were too incompetent to give him his answers quickly enough. Senjutsu? Kage suggested, and Ig considered that. Do you think you can pull it off? He asked. Maybe, Hakai answered instead of her twin. Considering the Akatsuki members that seemed to be after Naruto and the fact that he didn't have his team with him. We'll risk it, Ig decided, and he felt the shift on the twins' presences as they started the process of gathering natural energy while he ran. He'd trained them with Mindscape artificial natural energy, but even if they'd gotten the hang of it a little, it wasn't enough to want to risk it. But desperate times call for desperate measures, as the saying goes. He'd have to trust them, but at least there was a bright side. With some luck, the twins would probably notice if he was about to be turned into a stone statue and they would stop. With two of them, one would likely keep track of things and smack the other if they messed up. All the while he'd be fighting with Tsuchigumo's aid. A perfect arrangement, all things considered. And if all else failed, however, well, he'd have to manage without Senjutsu. Certainly quite the loss, but it'd have to do. Ig was nervous though, so very nervous. Not only in the case that he failed to reach Suna in time to help Naruto, but in the case that he didn't. Would he be able to help him? Would he be enough against Itachi and Kaizen? He had his doubts, if he was honest. Tsuchigumo might be the key he needed to cover that gap, but these people were Jinchuriki hunters. He couldn't very well put all his faith on a chakra beast with those two put against him. Then again, so had the other members, and he'd managed against them while hiding his full potential. Surely Tsuchigumo stacked on top of everything else would be enough. Yes, she had to be. the chakra beast herself growled something at him that sounded both determined and reassuring. Surprisingly, or maybe not, considering that she was connected to his mind in a way that not even the twins were, it worked pretty well. He'd put a lot of work into things, maybe less so as of late, but he couldn't bring himself to regret it. With how short a time he'd had to relax, he likely wouldn't have made all that much progress, if any at all. You did as good as could be expected of you, Ig Hakai said softly. Put those thoughts away, focus on the now, Kij told him. Ig guessed they weren't wrong, but it was rather difficult when such a battle was right there waiting for him. If he was lucky, that is. Sachigumo growled, but not like before. This wasn't threatening, it was comforting. He took a deep breath in, barely taking a second's pause from his continuous flickering. He continued immediately afterwards, but that was enough. He did his absolute best to keep his mind calm, in the middle of the storm of emotions. Ig was still angry, worried and afraid, but that was all. He needed his head in the game or he'd be dead. He needed to keep his cool at least a little, or, even if he was on time, Naruto would die regardless. That tempered his raging emotions. It helped him solidify them into something else, into a weapon. No doubts, no regrets. Ig would do all he could and it would be enough. Because it had to be enough. He was almost there, but that only made him want to go faster. Just a little more and he could reach sooner, and then. His next flicker was interrupted by a strange wind. A wind filled with leaves that were. His eyes widened. Kanon, he realized instantly as he looked at the pieces of paper that started circling around him. He half a mind to unleash conflagration on her then and there, let his aura of fire deal with her. However, that would be too easy, and the world wasted no time in showing him as much. A sardonic smile formed on his face. Of course, he muttered. Because why the fuck not, right? He asked, his voice turning into a growl as Sachigumo sent him straight into chakra beast mode, her leg equivalent to the tails of the 9 sprouting from his back. One, followed by another and then a last one. 4 spider legs extended from his back, shaped from the dark blue chakra of a new beast. Ig Sata, the voice of the newcomer, greeted him. You've been a distinctive thorn on our side for too long. And you've been one on mine for even longer, Ig replied, his eyes darting around and already going through plans and ideas. I really hope that Metal of Man works. I'd tell you to surrender, but I know that would be useless. You got that right. Let's get this over with quickly, okay? Ig replied, cracking his neck. It seemed that the time to talk was coming to an end rather quickly. Which was good, because he really didn't have it in him to wait much longer. His brother needed him. I have places to be. Pain. I have to say, Nagato's main puppet started, standing next to Kanon. Ig stared at them, even if he was more focused on the other 5 bodies. Although, saying that was a bit of an exaggeration. After all, the boy was more focused on one of them in particular. I don't know what that is, or why it feels like a chakra beast, but it doesn't matter, the Akatsuki leader continued speaking. Even still, you've. Now, Kij told him, and a second later, Ig felt it. In the blink of an eye, more specifically his eyes, the balance of the energies inside him was reached. His eyes then turned an even, beady black, not unlike those of his summons, in most cases. He didn't waste any time, activating all of his active skills instantly and blurring, for himself and for his enemies. In the span of a single instant, one of his fists went straight towards the Naraka Path's head and the other through its chest. As he pulled back, the thing exploded from the majorly overpowered tags he'd added in the latter strike for good measure. No bringing back the dead puppets, Nagato, sorry, Ig thought to himself, flickering towards another path. The animal path, to be precise. He didn't manage to get to it, of course, as the Deva path used its ability to push things to get Ig away from the animal summoning puppet. That was fine, because the Prita path was pierced right through from the very ground as New Ivory came up. He wasn't quite sure that would kill the guy, so he controlled the weapon and wire to tie forward/sew the puppet up. From what he knew and memorized, that particular path could absorb chakra. And while going the Naruto route and flooding it with natural chakra was an option, that had taken too long and he just didn't have time. Naruto needed him, Ig needed to be done with this mess really quick, either by making the pair run away or just killing them. The latter was a bit of wishful thinking, considering that he'd have to look for Nagato's actual body if he really wanted to deal with him permanently. Unfortunately for him, he just didn't have the time to do that. He'd have to put it off for later. As it was, New Ivory's wire should be strong enough to hold the guy down even if the chakra was absorbed. Now for the other four paths, Ig thought to himself. Right before his thoughts were interrupted by the Deva path. This time, the main puppet used its power to attract instead of push, pulling Ig's body towards it. Except, in the middle gathered a small storm of paper made by Kanon. Oh, no, fuck that, Ig thought, activating conflagration. He wasn't very sure how effective the fire would be against the jutsu paper, but if nothing else, it had made it difficult for the pair to see him. If the paper was as dangerous as he thought it was, World Ender would have to take care of the damage. God, I miss times when I could actually dodge stuff instead of tanking, Ig complained, as he continued his aerial trip, his body being cut everywhere as the razor-sharp paper tried to tear his body apart. Death by 1,000 cuts. That's not gonna stop me, and you know that, he added, preparing to engage in close combat if it came to that. Sure enough, he did, although not with who he expected. The senjutsu of the spiders was, as he'd figured out quite a while ago, much better at sensing than he could be with web sense. He couldn't quite see the future or anything, but he could sense how someone's muscles moved and guess what they'd do due to that. Which is why he saw the human path coming when the puppet body dashed towards him and tried to get a hold of him. Twisting his body away from the extended hand, Ig kicked the guy away. He'd have followed that up, but the Asura path soon followed. The punch to his chest that Ig couldn't quite dodge hit like he imagined a sledgehammer would if he were a normal person. Smacking him against the ground, which cracked under the pressure. Oh, no, it won't be that easy, Ig thought determinedly when he felt the Deva path float itself to try and put itself over him. No doubt trying to use his almighty push or whatever the technique was called to press him against the ground and incapacitate him. Ig flickered away, dashing towards the animal path as it seemed to go to summon something. Before reaching it though, he flickered to the side. The move was evidently the right call, because the very ground tore itself to pieces under the attractive power of the Deva path. He tried again, but sensing the main body going for another interception, he switched targets to the Asura path, who was apparently preparing to shoot him with some kind of missile-like projectiles. Evidently, Nagato expected him to dodge that, because the Deva path didn't try to intercept this time. The animal path behind him summoned some kind of gigantic creature, but if he was honest, Ig was the least worried about that one. As for the human path and Kanon, they seemed to be keeping their distance for the moment thanks to all the fire he was still casting on his surroundings. As for Ig himself, he powered through the explosions, using flickers every time one of the projectiles messed up his momentum. Nagato seemed to realize that the things wouldn't stop him because he tried to use the cannon that the Asura Path had for a head. A body that is an actual puppet, I just realized, Ig mused, almost absently stopping that attack from happening by wrapping the Path's head with wires. That bought him enough time to reach and destroy the puppet with a flurry of strikes powered with everything he could boost his body with. 3 down, 5 to go, Ig thought to himself, aware that there was no way he was getting at least one of those, since the count included Nagato's actual body. A paper spear pierced through his thigh from behind, proving once more that his fire technique was little more than a smoke screen but more dangerous looking. Sure, the flames did eat through the sheets that Kanon used for her techniques, but it was a slow, ineffective process. Only thing that was doing was make the woman have to use more chakra to keep her paper amounts, because he was certainly not stopping the attacks from coming and hitting even through the flames. Ig jumped over the paw of the oversized beast that the animal path had summoned, taking that moment to take out the weapon from his leg. Unfortunately for him, Pain wasn't going to let him just do that, and used the Deva path to pull him from the air. Fortunately for Ig, he had his ways to move even when mid-air. One of his wires shot out, partially hidden by the fire of conflagration and kept at a low height to be even less noticeable. The thread then wrapped around the animal path's leg, promptly pulling him with Ig. It was a momentary thing, since the summoner body wasted no time catching itself. Which worked well for the solitary Konoha, since it allowed him to have an anchor. Still in the middle of the air, right between the Deva path, Nagato's main Pain puppet, and the animal path, the beast summoner, Ig unleashed the sacred flock. S-class technique that it was, it made the human path jump away and Kanon broke into 1,000 pieces of paper. The remaining 2 couldn't very well move, since those were the ones containing him. That was fine, those were the ones he wanted to hit. Or, really, he only wanted the Deva path gone. He was the most troublesome and dangerous. Suddenly, that very body puppet pushed him away instead of continuing to pull, sending Ig straight into the animal path, who promptly wrapped its arms around him. Except, it's stealing Tsuchigumo's chakra, Ig Kij informed him, even if he'd noticed almost at the same time. I was wondering why Nagato didn't use all his abilities in all his puppets, Ig thought to himself then before something else was called to his attention. The beast disappeared, Kij told him then. He can't use more than one per body, for whatever reason, he explained. That was more troublesome than I expected, the Deva path commented, floating down in front of Ig as he struggled against the hold. Or that's the image he wanted to sell, at least. Fortunately, recovering all the bodies won't be all that much trouble, the Akatsuki leader said through his main body puppet. Right, he could just use the Nakara path through that body or the one that was holding Ig at that moment. After the fight was done, that is, because the guy seemed in no hurry to do so at that moment. He guaranteed some wariness, it seemed. Ig couldn't bring himself to feel proud of that. Kij, Ig said in his mind. On it, the male twin said instantly. Watch duty, Sachi, the boy added then, getting a whine from the beast. None of that, it's better if you recede now, he continued, and felt the beast chakra leave his body. The phantom spider limbs disappeared. He'd have used those to fight off the path that was holding him, but he'd changed plans slightly. He used the moment of pause, as Kanon formed and looked at him intently next to the main body puppet, waiting for him to just crumble after his chakra was depleted, no doubt. Unfortunately for them, that wouldn't be happening. It was fortunate that even if they knew he had a or something like a chakra beast, they didn't know the full extent of her capabilities. Evidently, they also either didn't know what natural energy felt like, or what large quantities of it could do, because the path that was holding him started turning to stone. The split second it took them to react was all IG needed. Calling off the twins and urging Sachigumo forward, he called for all the power he could, which wasn't really necessary, he soon learned. As he'd thought, the spider limbs Sachi's transformation granted him were enough to take care of the path. Or maybe the rage the chakra beast felt for that particular body puppet was what made it so easy. In the end, what mattered was that the four things that his adorable tenant gave him tore through the animal paths, or was it Prata path after changing its ability? Body. He hadn't been idle while waiting though, and wires instantly all but jumped from the ground and wrapped themselves around the human path. No mind attacks for you, Nagato IG thought to himself, taking a deep breath in. And then there were two, IG said, his breathing slightly ragged. Not so much from the fight as much as for the fight being right after running an entire nation's distance. Having to deal with this pair and being perfectly aware of his brother's dangerous situation. He thought he could be forgiven if he was a little out of it. Very troublesome indeed, Nagato said through the only remaining path, the Deva path. He sounded annoyed, which was saying something. The guy hadn't expressed or even shown much emotion throughout the whole thing. At least from what IG had picked up. I think that's. IG didn't let him finish. Sachi, he called, and the beast did exactly as he was thinking. Activating conflagration once more, he looked as flames covered the entirety of their surroundings. This time, however, the flames weren't their natural color. No, instead, they were a dark blue, exactly like Sachigumo's chakra. She was powering and overpowering his jutsu this time. The female cry that reached his ears told him that Kanon didn't come out unscathed this time. Good, that had been the intent. When IG felt the pull of the Deva path, he used the spider limbs to anchor himself to the ground. The fight was still on and he was very done with it all. He just wanted to reach Naruto and help him. Pain, Kanon and whoever else got in his way better be ready to die. The Deva path changed tactics then, because there was a pause in the pool as it floated up. No doubt preparing for his strongest technique, like IG would just wait there for it or something. As Pain moved, he did too, jumping up and commanding his threads to grab the puppet body to pull himself closer. The sacred flock took flight once more through the sea of blue flames. Kanon was too busy trying to get away from conflagration, but Pain was still making a nuisance of himself and he was the target of the lightning birds. IG was aware that he was throwing cards away. Aces that he'd kept up his sleeve for the endgame were turning to ashes in front of his very eyes. At the rate he was going, he'd have no secrets left to use by the end of the fight, still having plenty of enemies to fight. That didn't matter though, none of it did. He'd make new aces if he had to, he'd find new ways to deal with Akatsuki. What he couldn't do was find a new Naruto. The Deva path's push came then and there, the wires IG used to grab the man pressing against his body, wanting to dig into it. IG wasn't too concerned about that, first because World Ender would take care of any injury and second because it was much the same for Pain himself and he didn't have a technique to heal himself. Then Nagato decided to change tactics once more. The push turned into a pull, so strong that IG practically flickered right in front of him. The puppet body then snapped a hand forward and grabbed his forehead. That was all before. Oh, no, none of that, Kage snarled in IG's mind. You aren't welcome here, Pain Hakai continued, much colder. Sachigumo barked and growled menacingly. It took the boy barely a second to realize what he was doing. Especially when he felt his body freeze. Conflagration still raged, but Nagato's attack was enough to dispel the sacred flock since it required more fine control. The human path. The one that attacks minds. What is this? Nagato said through his puppet body, sounding surprisingly shocked. That's fine, stay there, Ig thought to himself, watching as the Deva path, human path, continued to slowly, very slowly be burned by conflagration's flames. His hands balled into fists though. He didn't have the time to wait for it. Then he noticed. If he could move his fingers. He focused as much as he could move. His body locking up had to be a first reaction to the attack on his mind. The twins and Sachi were there though. If a chakra beast's rampage hadn't broken his mind, pain sure as hell wouldn't either. He was stronger than that. He still needed to deal with the guy though. How did you even? Whatever he'd done, Ig didn't find out, because his fist pierced through the chest of the puppet body. The hand grabbing his head loosened its grip, but he wasn't done yet. Another punch to Pain's face sent him flying. No, I'm not done with you yet, Ig thought, flickering after the puppet body. Without having to defend his mind, the twins and Sachigumo returned to their posts. Mainly the latter, flooding his body with chakra once more. The returned spider limbs pierced a limb each as they reached the path, whichever it might have been at the moment. Sunfire Cape and World Ender roared, boosting his body on top of every energy skill he could use. And then the last of Pain's bodies was gone. But Nagato is still out there, Ig thought with a grimace. Kanon too, since the woman had fled as fast as she could. He could sense her getting away through his threads but he couldn't chase after her. He couldn't search for the Akatsuki leader's main body. No, he had other things to do. It'd have to be a battle for another time. Ig, come on, Kich said then, dragging his thoughts into a more coherent realm. You are almost there, pull yourself together. He was so tired though and everything burned. He took a deep breath in. No, he could continue, just a little longer. Just until Naruto was safe. We should store the bodies, in case Pain wants to get them back somehow, Hakai suggested, and he nodded absently. Ig made a clone then, throwing a storage scroll at it and leaving it to that. It'd take the scroll to the spiders after it was done and that would be that. He still didn't know what had happened to the spiders stationed in Suna, but that would be a question to ask later. With another deep breath in and with Sachigumo's energy burning his chakra coils, he started flickering again. If Pain's delay was enough to condemn his brother, Ig swore. He'd find a way to destroy Nagato more than he already was. He'd take his eyes, he'd kill Kanon, and God forbid if the man cared for Amigakyo. Calm yourself, Ig Hakai whispered softly, and he did his best to follow her advice. It was difficult, so very difficult. Sachigumo was fueling his wilder emotions and he wasn't in a condition to be calm in the first place. The twins didn't offer to take over though, because they knew they would have to deal with all that, and none of them could very well put up with all that and remain calm. Instead, the twins rose up in his mind, offering some support. Taking some of the mental strain as they helped him flicker forward. Ig felt his head clear a bit, and he sent a wave of gratitude towards the two. As he moved, ignoring the disaster zone that he left behind, a part of his mind couldn't help but lament not being able to go after those two. If he could just take them out of the board, permanently at that. It'd change everything. It'd be quite the move on his part, and the game he was playing would be that much closer to the end. He couldn't, however. Exhausted and annoyed and in pain he might be, but Ig still had his priorities and his family was in the highest place. There was already a chance that Naruto would be. There was a chance that he was already too late, but he'd be damned if he didn't still try his best to save him. He couldn't just risk it. There was no way he'd gamble with the blonde's life like that, he just couldn't. Everyone has to make hard choices sometimes, Ig Hakai told him, reassuringly. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call, for yourself if nothing else, Kage added, which did actually mean something. And so Ig moved, trying to keep his worries, his nerves and his doubts to the side and focus on what he was doing. Which was challenging enough, if he was honest. Moving as fast as he was in the desert wasn't something that he was used to put it mildly. It was very different from doing so on land, that was for sure. He had to do his best not to pull a gyrobo and fall face first into the dunes. Which brought his mind to his team. He wondered if they were following him as best they could. That was his best guess as to what they would do, but there was a chance that Kabuto would go to Tsunade to ask for orders and they might do something different. Ig rather doubted it though, but it was a possibility. He wondered if any of his friends were aware of what was happening. The ones in Iwa might know, at least, but... Well, Ig doubted anyone wanted more people rushing to Suna. Especially those that would have a hard time actually doing anything in the situation. He was running out of mental distractions. No thought could keep his mind occupied as he traveled, each step bringing his mind back to what he was doing. Or trying to do, at least. Just a bit more, he thought to himself, pleaded, more like. Hold on a little more, Naruto, come on. He'd be okay. Ig's brother would be okay. He had to be. That was when he saw, far into the distance, the cloud of smoke that could only mean one thing. That had to be Naruto. Ig's brother was, indeed, still fighting. That's the number one unpredictable ninja, Ig thought to himself. However, the relief outshone that feeling quite easily. Now, let's deal with these two and be done with this godforsaken day. Just hang on, Naruto. Oh. Nagato. That was unexpected, he muttered inside the cave he'd hidden himself in while controlling his paths. In a flurry of paper sheets, Kanon appeared in front of him. Nagato would freely admit to being concerned when he saw the burn mark on the woman's arm. When had been the last time he'd seen her hurt? He got Yoriko's body was the first thing she said, sounding hurt. In some way, Nagato understood what she must be feeling, but he also didn't. As the one to control the paths, he'd long since stopped seeing them as people. They were what puppets were to Suna's puppeteers, tools. It was a perspective he'd gained with time, however, and he could easily remember how it had been at the start, when he could almost fool himself into thinking Yoriko was still there with them. He got all of them, Nagato replied, keeping his voice neutral. Kanon, for her part, simply nodded and they remained in silence for a long moment. The weaver took the remains, she said then, almost sounding angry. Almost, but not quite. No doubt to stop us from getting the paths up immediately, Nagato reasoned, and he could respect the decision. The same way he could respect the weaver for his strength. The same way he could respect. What do you think of him? I guess you aren't asking regarding the fight or what he did just now? Kanon asked, unsurprisingly figuring out where he was going with the question instantly. I think you know what I think, she answered simply. Nagato guessed that was fair enough. They'd had many conversations on the matter of their main rival, as it were. Ig Sato was, after all, the one hunting down their members. The one fighting back against them, directly at least. The boy, now turning into a man, was a thorn on his side, yes. However, Nagato couldn't very well not respect him for what he did. For what he'd accomplished in his short but rather impressive career, if nothing else. The silence stretched for much longer then, and Nagato had to wonder what his dear friend was thinking. He knew he was quite vexed by what had been happening as of late. Plans had fallen apart, surprises had appeared, and questions had popped in his mind. That was, perhaps, the biggest accomplishment of the boy that had taken out each of his paths. Making Nagato think, question and reconsider. He'd been confused for a long time, and now, with all that had been happening as of late, even more so. However, he also found himself quite curious. The world seemed to be changing, and Nagato wanted to see just what it'd be by the end of it all. He wanted to know if it'd be closer to his and his teacher's vision, or if it'd be the opposite. The world walking an unexplored path, and uncertainty was the only thing that was assured. He was still curious though. And maybe, just maybe, Nagato would get to see the outcome of it all. Naruto Uzumaki. The fight was going nowhere. He knew it, Kurama knew it, and the Akatsuki pair knew it. There was literally nothing he could do to stop them, it seemed. It was a matter of time before he just fell. Despite the impression he'd always had regarding his tenant, Naruto was realizing that their reserves of chakra weren't infinite. He'd known that, for sure, but it was a different thing to know something intellectually and to believe it. After all, he'd never even seen a small fraction of it. Surely it was only finite in name, right? Wrong. Stupid sword, stupid Akatsuki, he grumbled to himself as he continued to fight. The living, chakra-eating sword of the shark guy was draining Kurama's energy like there was no tomorrow. The thing was gulping down the stuff like he would have Ishiraku ramen. God, having one last bowl of the stuff before dying would have been nice. Not really the time, Brat Kurama grumbled in his mind, and he gave the beast the point. Then again, it didn't really matter all that much how much he focused on the fight. They'd been at it for quite a while already, and things weren't changing at all. Sure, he'd gotten a lucky hit at Shark Boy's arm, which managed to leave a decent gash on the upper part. And sure, he'd almost hit Sasuke's brother a few times, leaving his black coat burnt in several places. However, that was it. Nowhere near enough damage was done to his opponents as to stop them, and he was already practically on his last legs. Naruto and Kurama's combined strength had not diminished all that much, but they were nearing the point where they'd run out of juice soon. Case in point, the fact that he'd long since stopped making clones. Well, it was nice to be able to let loose, I guess, Kurama said then, not quite resigned, but Naruto knew that was the sentiment behind the words. He totally got it, if he was honest. At least he'd go down swinging, that was as much as he could ask, he supposed. It was nice to not be alone for this, Naruto thought, more to himself than to his tenant. Evidently, he was still hurt, considering the huff he heard from the beast. So, thank you. He got no actual response, but that was fine. Naruto stopped then, standing on all four limbs on top of a dune. His 9 chakra tails swinging menacingly behind him. Besides that, he didn't move though, only growling lowly at the pair of hunters that were out to get him. Both of whom stood there, watching him, not quite warily but still cautious. By then the two knew very well that he was a tricky bastard. As well they should, Naruto mused proudly. Ready to give up, brat? I'll admit this was more fun than I thought, but it's quickly turning annoying, Shark Boy said, with his irritating, sharp-toothed grin still in place. God, how he'd have liked to knock a few of those teeth out. Sadly, it was not to be. Naruto didn't reply though, simply just waiting for them to move. If they wanted him so badly, the least they could do was come for him. So, he stood there, low on energy the Jinchuriki might have been, but without the stupid sword draining his reserves, he had all the time in the world. Figuratively speaking, of course. He still would be able to stay where he was for quite a bit. The Akatsuki knew it too, if the look they traded was anything to go by. Thus, they rushed at him with no hesitation. Not that Naruto expected any, really. He knew he was the one with the odds stacked against him. I'm used to that though, he thought to himself, a grin spreading over his face under the coat of red chakra that hid him from the world. Determined to go with one last trick, he did his best to avoid the sword of Shark Boy's. He jumped, and twisted his body away from it, his chakra tails lashing out, just away from the range of the living weapon. He didn't quite hit the freak swordsman, but he did singe his clothes a little. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He wasn't done yet. He wanted to land one last hit. Just one more, come on, the blonde thought determinedly. Granted, it had been the same thought he'd had before delivering the cut to Shark Boy, but that wasn't the important part. Call him greedy, but he wanted as many hits in as he could manage. Sadly, it was not to be. An attack from Itachi Uchiha disturbed Naruto enough for his partner to start eating away at the Jinchuriki's chakra. From there, it spiraled out of the blonde's control really quick. His last drops of energy vanished from in between his fingers and he got slower and weaker. Until, lastly, the scaled weapon hit him straight in the chest, tearing apart his clothes and sending him flying off. Hitting another dune, Naruto was left there, in the middle of a crater. The grains of sand fell around him, slowly covering his arms and legs. He'd have been worried about being buried alive, if not for the fact that he had more concerning things to worry about. Besides, a hand gripped his neck then and brought him up. And so the hunt ends, Shark Boy said as Naruto brought his hands up to try and claw at the man's arm. It was useless, but he'd fight until the very end. Even if his fingers and nails did nothing to the Akatsuki agent. Even if it was for naught. He refused to just give up. That wasn't him. If it makes you feel any better, you've been our most difficult mission so far, the swordsman added. Now, please, while the struggle is amusing, it'll be annoying while traveling, the Shark Boy finished with, raising his fist. However, the strike that Naruto knew was coming never arrived. Instead, the arm that held him yanked to the side abruptly, pulling the blonde with it. There were many sudden movements that followed, but two things stood out for Naruto. An almost inaudible whistling and a cackling sound. A very familiar cackling. Then, before he could fully process what had happened, he felt something else that was familiar. Curious, very curious, Kurama whispered in his mind, voice low as if he were talking to himself. It also reminded Naruto of why he was so familiar with the feeling that settled over him. It was exactly like that of the Nine Tails, the presence of something far above a ninja. Another chakra beast. The next thing he was able to process was that he fell to the ground, even though Shark Boy's hand was still gripping at his neck. It felt weaker though, and then, looking at it, he saw that the arm was no longer attached to the freaky swordsman. You have some nerve, a voice said. A voice that Naruto had been sure he'd never hear again. Ignoring the fingers that wrapped around his throat, he turned to look. He had to make sure. That's not a genjutsu, right? He thought to himself, almost fearing what Kurama would tell him. Surely he hadn't looked into the Uchiha's eyes, right? He was sure he had avoided that. It's not the chakra beast replied, still sounding thoughtful. That's not the unbelievable part. And Naruto knew what Kurama was talking about, because not only was his brother, Iji himself, standing right there, in front of him. The other boy was also covered in a coat of chakra very similar to the one the blonde had when he'd used the Kyuubi's chakra, except that it was blue instead of red and had spider legs on his back instead of tails. That was Iji though, there was no mistaking him. I thought we were past the days when I had to cover your sorry ass, Naruto Iji said, and the blonde could almost hear the smirk on his face. Above all else, he sounded relieved. Just as relieved as Naruto himself felt. I had them right where I wanted them, he shot back, unable to muster any kind of annoyance. Go to Suna, Naruto. Put up a barrier and stay there, Iji said then. He never turned towards him, but that wasn't strange. He could see with his threads, after all, and Naruto was sure that he'd already made sure he was fine. Illogically, it stung a little that he didn't bother to give him a single look with his eyes, but he got it. His brother was too busy in a staring contest with the Akatsuki pair. Shark Boy seemed almost entertained with holding the sleeve of his coat over the stump that remained of his arm. To his credit, the swordsman didn't seem too bothered by that, occupied with looking at Iji together with Itachi. Naruto would have gone as far as saying that they were wary of his brother, considering that they didn't immediately engage him. Go, Naruto. Now Iji repeated, more intently. Naruto wanted to argue, he really did. He wanted to say he'd help. He wanted to offer his seals. There had to be something he could do, right? He knew that Iji had been hunting these people for a while already and was experienced dealing with them. However, Iji always had his team and now that didn't seem to be the case. He couldn't just leave him, right? We have to go, Kurama said, reluctantly, very much so. Hell, Naruto hadn't even known the chakra beast could make a sound like that. The Kyuubi sounded hesitant, shameful even. We'll get in his way. Tell him, however. You better not die, Naruto repeated a second later, leaving out some extra words. That was the message the both of them wanted to send. So that was what he said. He received a chuckle in response. I'm not dying until I see you become Hokage, Iji replied, and the blonde could definitely hear the smile on his face. He noted, however, that he sounded tired, so very tired. Iji was in Iwa, Naruto remembered then, and he wondered just how his brother had gotten to Suna. Surely he didn't. He didn't finish that thought though. Go, Naruto, please, Iji said, and the blonde nodded, flickering away. He felt awful doing that, he felt like trash. He heard the echoes of voices from years past. The scorn and hate of Konoha's citizens as they cursed his very existence. Their words twisted, accusing him of leaving his own brother alone with enemies that could see him killed. Pointed out how much of a coward he was, for running away to save his own hide instead of defending his friend, his family. Don't be stupid, Kurama told him, and Naruto could almost dare to call the chakra beast's voice soft. Almost. There was nothing more for you to do, the Kyuubi continued. You'd have gotten in his way. You'd have made it more likely for him to die. I know. Naruto replied weakly as he moved, flickering away. It felt like an ice knife was being driven right through his gut just by using the technique. He wasn't lying. He knew the beast was right. He knew IG was right. However, it made it hurt all the more. Any other fight, I wouldn't have accepted running away, Kurama continued then, sounding supremely annoyed. Downright angry, really, and Naruto was surprised to notice that it had been a while since he'd heard his tenant sound like that. That sword. We have nothing to fight against that. And IG does. More than we do, at least, Kurama admitted. We will repay this favor though. I won't owe a human of all things. I'm a human too, you know. Naruto pointed out weakly. Your point. But yeah, we are paying him back, the blonde agreed, flickering again. Glad to know we agree on something. Yeah. Oh. IG Sata. I liked that arm, you know. Kaizen masked and he felt his eye twitch. He wanted to be done with it all yesterday. He was tired, his everything hurt and he was annoyed. The day couldn't be over soon enough. I suppose I can't ask you to go the fuck away, right? IG said, almost deflating. Sachigumo was a blessing though, because she had enough energy to keep him going like a permanent fix of caffeine straight to his system. God, I love you, Sachi, he mentally voiced, getting an appreciative bark in response. Sadly, we can't do that attack, I replied, looking as weary as IG felt. Although, to be fair, he wasn't sure if that was due to the Uchiha's illness or the situation. Or both, for that matter. Regardless of it all, IG still would have to deal with them, it seemed. Never did find out if Itaka's situation was different in this world or if it's as my notes say, he noted mentally. It was a shame, but he'd do what he needed to. If the man was truly on Konoha's side then, well, with some luck, he'd understand. No time for hesitation, Kage told him, and IG agreed. Finally gonna start the fight. Kaizen asked with same harder twisting where it rested over the swordsman's shoulder. The weapon was as eager for the fight as its wielder, evidently. IG, for his part, sighed and resigned himself. Through it all, he kept his eyes closed, only sensing the world through senjutsu and web sense. No way he was opening his eyes at all in the presence of Itachi Uchiha. He wasn't even sure how Naruto had managed to not fall under a genjutsu, really. Had Kurama's help been enough to stave off the illusions? It seemed the two had been working together in the fight just then, after all. Was something else going on? Regardless, he wasn't going to risk it. It was still weird to fight with his eyes closed, even if he was aware of just as much as he was with them open. His eyes had no value with his sensing skills in use, but no matter how much he'd trained to fight without them, it'd never feel quite right to keep his eyes closed. Even if he knew everything that was going around, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he wasn't seeing anything. IG took a deep breath in. And so it begins, Kage said, staying right at the edge of IG's mind in case he needed to do something. All while keeping an eye on Hakai, who was still keeping his senjutsu going. His one-person team was ready, it seemed, as accentuated by Sachigumo's bark. I'd really appreciate it if you gave up, IG said, with a wry smile on his face as his wires rose around him and his chakra-made spider legs twitched. His mind ran through ideas while Kage helped him plan out a strategy, suggesting changes, offering his opinion and even throwing in some ideas of his own. Yeah, no, Kaizen replied, raising his sword before letting it fall to the ground at his side. IG felt the man's muscles tensing, readying for the fight. Itachi, for his part, remained calm, relaxed. It was almost like the Uchiha wasn't even planning on participating. He could only hope. With lightning at his feet, IG dashed forward. New Ibari met Same harder and Kaizame laughed, like he was suddenly having the time of his life. The younger swordsman, for his part, felt himself grow annoyed. Mainly because his opponent's weapon made it difficult to face him. Ig would, after all, need to fight Kaizame with only Taijutsu and Kenjutsu. Anything involving chakra would be useless. Hell, it'd work against him to do so, since he'd only be throwing his energy to the wind. Or to the chakra-eating sword, at least. Even Sunfire Cape was out of the question, judging by the way Same harder was trying to twist its way towards him, snapping its jaws at Ig as if trying to get a bite. He was fairly sure that it'd have gotten to eat his energy if the stuff were wrapped around him for the buff technique. Hell, Ig was even afraid that it'd be able to eat away at his reserves even if he didn't use chakra. Fortunately, from what he was gathering, that wasn't how it went. It did force him to send Tsuchigumo back to simply providing the bare minimum of chakra. It was a shame to give up on the chakra beast mode, but it was what it was. At least he still had some buffs on. Thank God for small mercies. Fortunately, as he continued using New Ibari to block Same harder from reaching him, he could use his wires and chakra against Itakai. When the Uchiha made his move, the threads rushed at him with all the might Ig could put in them. On top of that, he shot his sacred flock from his back, away from Same harder's reach, making the lightning birds rush towards Itakai too. That didn't do nearly as much as Ig hoped though, since the Uchiha promptly shot wind techniques to disrupt his attacks. That didn't matter though, he could continue shooting the lightning jutsu at the man almost forever thanks to Tsuchigumo. Still, Ig flickered to the side and blocked Same harder once more as he dodged one of the Uchiha's own attacks. The battle had barely gotten started and Ig was already seen himself cornered. Kaizame made all his jutsu basically useless. Itakai would be untouchable unless he could give it his all against the Uchiha. And even a battle of attrition was going to go against him. After dealing with Pain and Kanon, even Tsuchigumo's impressive reserves had suffered, never mind adding all the energy he'd spent getting from Iwa to Suna. On top of that, he was sure that eventually Same harder would start eating away at his reserves. No way he'd be able to just keep Kaizame at bay forever. The pair would eventually wear him out and he knew it so. How was he going to turn things to his favor? Ig had one thing going for him and that was the wound he'd inflicted on Kaizame. He'd have preferred to just kill the guy, but the Akatsuki swordsman was too good for that. One less arm was still good though, and it served to activate Bloodhound and Beast of Prey, so that was nice too. However, the wound was being a lot less useful than one would think. Kaizame seemed to just be that much of a troublesome opponent, it seemed. Another thing he had going for him was the fact that he knew their skill sets, somewhat. Not in detail, of course, but he had an idea of what they could do, so he could deal with that. Unfortunately, it was a lot less useful than it had been against Pain, but it was something. He just needed to find an opportunity, an opening somewhere. No such thing happened. Kaizame continued fending off any attack of his own and having him block anything the swordsman sent his way. Itakai continued avoiding and dispersing any attack Ig sent at him while sending some of his own for the boy to dodge. No openings, no weaknesses. I'll have to make one, then Ig thought, grimacing as he parried a particularly strong slash from Kaizame. The man was keeping the force behind his attacks changing, sometimes weaker, sometimes stronger. It was disorienting, which was probably the whole point behind that. His partner did much the same, if in his own way. Itakai seemed to like varying from sending barrages of jutsu at him to sending a single, very powerful, very troublesome technique his way. IG would have found himself respecting the two, if he wasn't so busy cursing them for being so goddamn good. Wait it out, come on, he chanted in his mind, continuing to look for a window of opportunity. He dodged and he blocked, dearly hoping that he'd last long enough for the plan that was forming in his mind to work. He could make it. Just need some more time, come on, he mused, momentarily opening his eyes to check on the screen that he mentally called. Energy points, 68/1220. It was so very little, especially if he wanted to activate a bunch of skills at once. The poised perk had carried him through most fights where he used energy skills, since it made them free for a while when he started a fight at full energy. However, he didn't have that now. He'd used that card against Pain and Kanon, and it only worked once per day. No, he needed to do this the normal way. He needed enough for a second, at the very least, to take his opponents off guard as he usually did. However, that'd require quite some energy points. Running used 5 per second. Free running used 10 per second. Intermediate Taijutsu used 30 per second. Intermediate Kenjutsu used 30 per second. To have them all active for even a second, he needed 75 energy points. The same points that recharged agonizingly slow, even after so much time and so many titles and so many perks. Energy points had always remained his cheat code, the outlier part of his system, the single thing that didn't even exist in the world he lived in, together with his inventory. They were some of his ultimate cards for a reason. Now, he just needed to wait for it a bit. Maybe save some more energy points if he could manage to last that long. 1 second could be enough, for sure, but 1 second also wasn't that much. If 1 second wasn't enough, not only would he have to wait, but he'd have revealed his cards to the enemy, meaning that it wouldn't be nearly as effective the second time. What to do, what to do? Just a bit more, Igikij whispered to him as he continued the battle of attrition that could go either way. Just a few more minutes. And wasn't that just hilarious? Minutes. He had to survive this fight against two S-ranked individuals for minutes. Every second felt like it was dragged on for an hour. His stamina and chakra were being derailed slowly but surely. And he had to last 4 minutes. His plan better work or he'd be screwed. There was no way he'd survive if he failed. His senses strained, closing in on his two enemies and reading their every movement. He needed all the information he could get to keep up the fight. To make the entire battle continue on for a bit longer. A technique was going there, a slash was coming from the side. A technique wanted to make him move towards where Kai's aim would strike, so he tanked it. Just a bit more, he repeated to himself, like a mantra of sorts. He could do it, he could win. IG knew he could, he just needed to push his body a little more. Just a bit more. Do it, Igikij told him after Kai's aim sword moved the smallest bit too far. Just when Itakai was throwing a technique the smallest bit slower than the rest. It was the chance he'd been waiting for. A trap, maybe, but he didn't think so. His opponents didn't know, after all, that he had cards that would allow him to use that chance at all. And if they suspected, then they still weren't sure what he'd do. So, he went for it. All his energy skills were activated and he put all that energy into one thing and one thing only. He charged forward and New Iberi clashed against Same harder once more. This time, however, the result was different than before. Much different. There was a sound of surprise that came from Kai's aim as the swords met. It wasn't really unexpected though, considering the way New Ivory pushed against Same harder with a surprising amount of strength all of a sudden. The living sword was moved aside as if it were nothing, completely breaking the Akatsuki member's stance. Ig could work with that, and he did. He took that opening for all it was worth. There was no way he wouldn't. He had a split second to change the tide of the battle, after all. If he failed, he was doomed. Behind him, he felt Itakai do something different, no doubt reading how things were going to go on Kaizame's side. Ig cursed internally as he felt chakra coalesce around the Uchiha, forming a very distinctive shape. The shape of an armored arm and then a sword. A gigantic, imponent structure of pure energy that boded nothing but bad things for him, that was for sure. Susanoo had joined the battle. More reasons to make sure this goes well, he thought as this happened, spinning midair with some help from his wires. He hit Same harder again with New Ivory, pushing against it harder while his foot hit Kaizame, who was still trying to recover into a semblance of a stance, in the stomach. He didn't stop there though, no, he kept at it. His arm snapped forward and up, hitting the swordsman in the jaw as a wire snuck up on Kaizame, wrapping around his foot. Come on, Ig all but pleaded as he electrocuted the thread. It wouldn't do that much to Kaizame of all people, but it was something. He was running out of time and Susanoo's blade was starting to move. And finally, with another hit of New Ivory's, he got his wish. The stacking of hits made Kaizame drop Same harder at last. Ig wasted no time whatsoever kicking the living sword away as it writhed, looking for its wielder. He could have none of that though. Dashing for it, his fingers wrapped around the handle of the weapon. Behind him, he heard laughter from Kaizame. It was probably warranted, Ig supposed. As far as the man knew, he couldn't wield the thing, since it attacked anyone that it didn't approve of as a wielder. A fact that was evidenced when spikes came out of the handle and pierced through his hand. Even more soon followed when he didn't let go. When that didn't help, it seemed to decide to go for his forearm. That was all the time Ig needed though, and a second later the sword disappeared into thin air. Susanoo stopped and Kaizame's laugh died a quick death. What did you do? The swordsman without a sword asked, almost sounding disturbed. Sent it to a place where no one will find it, Ig replied with a smirk. He didn't even need to lie about that, really. As far as he knew, nobody could access his inventory. Same harder was lost to the world as long as he wanted, and thus, Kaizame's greatest strength was now out of the fight. And with it, Ig's was back. Instantly, Sachigumo howled, wrapping him in chakra that felt both like a warm embrace and a cold, hard armor. Sunfire Cape activated too, for good measure. He was back at full strength, grinning widely as Susanoo's blade came down on him, only to be stopped by the 4 arachnid legs made of chakra that came out of his back. Now we can play, he said. Inside his mind, Sachigumo barked and he felt Kij grinning. Good job, the twin told him as the sacred flock came out of his body. Lightning birds rose like a cackling cloud of the things, considering that now he didn't need to be careful so that they wouldn't be eaten by Same harder. It was so very freeing to have to hold back unwillingly and now be able to let loose. It was one thing to keep cards up one's sleeve deliberately and another entirely to be forced to not use things. Another arm formed for attack Susanoo, and that looked dangerous enough for Ig to decide that was enough just standing there. One of those overpowered swords was enough for him, that was for sure. Sachi might have been sending him a confident feeling, but he didn't want to test things if he could help it. Which he could, so he would. He dashed to the side, letting the first chakra sword hit the sand on the ground and send up a cloud of the stuff. Kai'Same, clearly not seeing himself out of the fight just yet, followed his movement easily enough, going for Taijutsu now that he was weaponless. The man dodged New Ibari when IG tried to use it, but he couldn't very well evade all the wires that followed right after. Forced to jump away just as fast as he'd done so Kai'Same clicked his tongue. IG didn't let up though, instead charging on the man, not giving him a moment to breath. Attack I with Susanoo on would be a nightmare to deal with, so he'd leave the man be for the moment. Sachigumo could block any attack from the chakra structures, and if more than one sword came at him, he'd dodge. The battle was going his way now, and he knew it. However, he needed to press that advantage while he could. He couldn't let them turn the tables on him like he'd done on them. After all, he didn't think he could pull something to change the situation again if it came to that. Come on, he chanted in his mind, all but willing Kai'Same to get hit by one of his threads. Just the one, and it'd snowball from there. He just needed to hit one. IG dodged a Susanoo sword and used his own weapon against the former Kirin. The sacred flock was doing nothing to the Susanoo armor, he noticed. He'd thought that maybe focusing on one part would be enough to pierce through eventually, but it didn't seem to be the case. That thing was as solid as it was going to be. Which wasn't bad per se, not really. The next lightning bird that came from IG didn't go in the Uchiha's direction. Instead, it rushed Kai'Same, whose eyes widened. A single one of those birds was A-ranked, according to his system and pretty much anyone that had ever commented on it. And normally, that wouldn't be all that much against an S-ranked ninja. But these weren't normal circumstances. Kai'Same was S-ranked all right, probably high up on the list. But that was, according to all the info IG had, because of Same harder. The sword wasn't the only thing in the man's repertoire though. Supposedly, he also had monstrous chakra reserves. That didn't do much when he was a water specialist for the most part. After all, he was now a swordless swordsman and a water specialist in the middle of a desert. All of Kai'Same's advantages had been taken from him, one by bad luck and another on purpose. Suddenly, he might not be an S-ranked ninja anymore. But that wasn't what was important. There wasn't much to stand in the way of the lightning bird that hit him almost point blank. Resilient, he might have been, but even if a single hit wasn't enough, the rest of the avian rush sure was to take him out. Sachigumo blocked another slash of Susanoo as IG pierced Kai'Same's head with New Ibari. It felt almost anticlimactic, for it to be so easy. So simple a thing. It was the sort of thing that happened when one stacked enough things together though. Difficult things became laughably easy at some point. And then there was one, he said, turning to regard the Uchiha who looked as calm as he'd been the whole time. Again, I don't suppose I can ask you to give up, right? He asked, noticing the man's bleeding eyes. How long would be too long for the fight to go on? Would Itachi go blind if he drew the battle on? Did he have enough juice in him to take IG out before his sight left him? As it was, those were the key questions, really. Would IG and Sachigumo run out of energy? Would Itachi go blind? Which would happen first? Evidently, the Uchiha wasn't that confident in his chances, because the now two arms of his Susanoo did their best to slash at IG. The younger boy, for his part, did his best to always dodge one at the least. He trusted his partner to block the other. Every strike ate away at Sachigumo's chakra though. Her energy levels are fine, don't worry about it, Kij reassured him, which was indeed a relief. With that said, things weren't looking so good on the offensive side for IG. His sacred flock was doing absolutely nothing to the armor. New Ivory might be able to pierce through, but he was reluctant to try that. If he failed, he'd be left like Kai'Same, without his main weapon. Even worse, if he lost New Ivory, he'd lose a bunch of buffs with it, and that was unacceptable. That could easily spell his doom in the current situation. Why isn't he using other things? IG had to wonder at some point. Sure, he'd sort of negated Atakai's genjutsu, between Eternal Purge and keeping his eyes closed. However, there was more to the Uchiha than just illusions, wasn't there? Where was the fire release? Where was Amaterasu? Where was? There had to be other things, right? There had to be more than just Susanoo, right? What was happening? Was he walking into a trap? He couldn't think like that though. If Atakai had tricks in his hat yet, surely he'd have used them when his partner was alive, right? No way he'd save them so much as to sacrifice Kai'Same. IG didn't have very clear memories or notes on the two's relationship, but he was fairly sure that it wasn't bad. So, don't overthink things, IG Kij told him, which was true. He was getting in his own head. He needed to focus. Exhaustion was getting to his mind, and no amount of borrowed energy and mental support would have him at full capacity. Almost done, IG, come on. And right then and there something changed. One of the Susanoo's arms and sword vanished into thin air. It wasn't as obvious an opening as one would think though. The armor and other arm were still there, being a danger and protecting Itakai. The reason for this shift became evident less than a second later. Iji's right arm burst into flames. Black flames. He didn't stop because of this though. He didn't hesitate in his next move either. Lightning cackled at his feet as he dashed straight towards Itakai. World Ender would take care of any damage the inextinguishable flames did to him, and Iron Will would do so with the pain of the whole process. Only one Susanoo sword to deal with was an opportunity for him, after all, and he'd take that chance with both hands. The flames started expanding, going up towards his torso and down towards his hand. He didn't care for that though. All that he cared about was the Uchiha in front of him. Lightning enveloped his weapon, chakra flow making an already legendary sword even more deadly. Getting as close as he possibly could with the chakra armor still there, IG reared his arm back. That was when New Ivory did what it did best. Pierce. And pierce it did, making a hole straight through Susanoo as if it weren't there to begin with. The weapon continued through like nothing had happened, intent on piercing through the Uchiha's heart. Itakai was not a nobody, however, and he dodged, of course. Or, tried to, that is. The sword missed its mark, but still skewered the man's shoulder instead. From there, things only went downhill for the Uchiha, as IG flickered to the side, pulling on the wire that was attached to the sword. The thread that he held on his left hand circled around Itakai with him as he went for his weapon. Living Thread, for its part, made sure that New Ivory moved on its own back towards him. By that point, IG was already half covered by Amaterasu, but he powered through. No fire would stop him. The fire burned badly, for sure, but World Ender healed just as much. At least with Tsuchigumo making sure that it kept up its pace. Which was good enough to keep his body from turning to ash. Then, his hand found New Ivory once more and Susanoo's sword came down, slicing clean through his left arm as he went to grab the sword. The limb fell to the ground, staining the sand red, and IG stood there for a whole second. That couldn't have just happened, right? How had? What? But IG. Kij shouted in his mind and Tsuchigumo barked, still struggling to power his healing technique. At that very moment, Susanu's sword was slashing straight towards him, aiming to cleave him in half. The boy, however, snapped out of his shock at his ally's calls before jumping over the chakra blade. Meanwhile, he pulled at New Ivory with living thread, bringing the sword up towards his remaining hand. Ig flickered away, doing his best to concentrate on the fight. Chakra flow was still coursing through the wire of his weapon, but the lightning energy wasn't doing that much against the Uchiha, it seemed. He would keep it up though, because just not doing it might make things even worse than they were already. Tsuchigumo can't cover you, Ig. Kij exclaimed, as he flickered away, dodging Susanu's blade once more. Right, that made sense. The chakra beast was busy now, keeping his body from burning up. Amaterasu's flames covered him completely now, and the fire wasn't something weak that World Ender could just keep at bay by itself. On top of that, he'd had to heal the wound that was left by his severed arm. Ig. Kij called again. He moved the spider limbs himself, blocking the chakra sword as it came for him. Gritting his teeth, he did his best to keep the thing away from him. Credit for Tsuchigumo there, it wasn't easy to stop the thing. He could barely do anything as he focused on that. Which complicated matters, since he could do nothing but stand there, all the while Itachi burned through Tsuchigumo's reserves with both the Susanu attack and Amaterasu. We have to think of something, Ig. Kij said, but that was easier said than done. He could barely move. His mind felt slow and his thoughts jumbled. The world around him was burning and something smacked against Itachi right then and there, sending the Uchiha flying towards a dune. The sudden movement almost pulled Ig with him through New Ivory's wire that was still going through his opponent's shoulder. What was that, he wondered, for a split second focusing on something other than Itachi with his senses. Of all the reckless, stupid things you could have done was his next thought. There, standing where Itachi had been a moment ago, was his brother, in all his unpredictable glory. Covered in a red chakra cloak and with 9 tails swaying behind him, Naruto himself turned to look at Ig. He wanted to smack the blonde and scold him to kingdom come. He also wanted to hug him for all he was worth, which was a lot as far as he was concerned. Focus Kij reminded him and he did just that. He could decide what to do after he'd dealt with Itachi. Naruto seemed to decide similarly, because he charged straight at the Uchiha. As for Ig himself, he did much the same, circle a bit to approach from a different direction. Another good thing that the sudden arrival of Naruto did was break Itachi's eye contact with Ig's body for a moment, which meant that the black flames had let up, if only momentarily. That meant that when the fire came back, Tsuchigumo was prepared for it. It didn't help alleviate the damage, but it gave her some breathing room. A more clear-headed chakra beast meant a more clear-headed Ig too, since there was less emotion filtering towards him through their connection. Which was great, because his brother was giving him a perfect opening right here. The cloaked Naruto smacked against the Susanu arm, knocking the thing aside and giving Ig plenty of room to get to Itachi. Which he immediately did, charging close by. Instead of doing as before and throwing New Ivory though, he flickered to the sides for a moment, trying his best to make the attack as unpredictable as possible. And then the needle sword flew once more. It pierced through, just as before, and while Itachi dodged once more, he was late to it again. This time, Ig wasn't alone for the Uchiha to take advantage of the opening that him not having New Ivory created. Instead, he had a Jinchuriki to deal with. That made it so that Ig easily maneuver around to get the weapon once more and throw it once more. And thus, the sewing needle did just that, eventually having tied the Uchiha's body together from the insides. On top of that, as the process happened, he noticed something. Susanoo was getting slower, less powerful. Amaterasu's flames grew weaker and the wounds less difficult to heal. As Itachi fell to the ground, limbs sewn together, the armor vanished and the fire was put out. "It's done?" Naruto asked hesitantly. Iji didn't answer him though, falling to his knees and his hands barely keeping his body from hitting the dune under him face first. "Iji! Iji!" the blonde called while he breathed heavily. His senses were focused on Itachi, trying to get a read on him. There was barely any chakra in the Uchiha anymore. Which was impressive more than anything, considering that Iji was almost out of energy himself and he had a chakra beast helping him. Idly, he noticed that something was put over him and a second later he realized that it was Naruto's jacket. It was torn and burnt, but it was better than the nothing that Iji was wearing, having had his clothes burned to ashes by Amaterasu. The boy couldn't bring himself to care so much. It was finally done. The Akatsuki pair had been dealt with, at last. Kai's aim was out, Itachi barely clung to consciousness and Pain and Kanon were out for the foreseeable future. The immediate threats had been dealt with. Moreover, his senses weren't picking up anyone else anywhere close, so there was no one to ambush them at that moment. "Iji!" Naruto called, and there was a tint of horror in his voice. Iji didn't know why though. They'd dealt with everyone. They were safe. Naruto was fine. Iji was alive. Everything was good. "Iji, your arm," Naruto said then, pulling him into a hug. "Oh," Iji thought, his attention being brought to his stump. A wound that he couldn't heal with World Ender. "It doesn't work on limbs," he mused, almost distractedly. "Iji, Itachi isn't dead yet," Kid reminded him, his voice almost soft on the back of his mind. Iji also noticed, distractedly, that Sachigumo was whimpering. The twin was right though. It wasn't over yet. They had to deal with the remaining Akatsuki member in a more definitive manner. Forcing himself to stand up, Iji took a shaky step forward. "Iji?" Naruto asked, looking at him with wide, disturbed eyes. "We have to finish the job," Iji said, starting to move towards the Uchiha. "We can rest after that. We can take some time after that." "Iji." "Fine," Naruto acknowledged reluctantly, his eyes darting towards the Uchiha in question. "Use this though," the blonde added, pushing a seal tag into his hands. Doing as he was told, Iji blinked when his legs were suddenly covered with pants. Black and orange, a pair of Naruto's evidently, further evidenced by the fact that they were a little too short for him. "Thanks," he replied wearily as he continued moving forward. "You are insane," Iji, Naruto told him, walking next to him. His blue eyes unable to stay away from the stump that was now where Iji's left arm should be for long. He still gulped down whatever was in his mind and accompanied his brother as they approached their opponent. Iji Sato and Naruto Uzumaki Itachi greeted them with as they reached him. "The two my little brother sees as siblings now. It's fitting, I guess, that you two were the ones to take me down." "You," Naruto growled at that. "You have some nerve just saying that after what you did to Sasuke. You don't even deserve to call him brother at all." Iji, for his part, sat down in front of the bleeding and restrained Uchiha. With his senses firmly looking for the smallest of signs and his metaphorical finger in the trigger of chakra flow and a bunch of other techniques to hit Itachi with, he allowed himself to relax. Somewhat. He was so very tired and he wanted to be done with it all. However, he owed Sajuk something. I want to know, Ig started, tilting his head to one side. Is there something we don't know about you and the Uchiha? Because I'm aware that Konoha has its secrets. I want to know if there's something we've been missing. Because I've looked into your case and, it's strange. Everyone sung you praises before you supposedly went mad. That's happened before, but it usually could be explainable in some way. And that was the truth, actually. Jiraiya and Tsunade had reasons for abandoning Konoha. Everyone already thought Orochimaru was a little unhinged. Even Danzo had people suspicious of him. And so on the list went, as far as Ig's research had gone. Itachi though, everyone thought he was just fine, that he was great even while coming from a clan that was generally not that well liked back in the day. Naruto turned towards him, surprised by what he said before frowning. No doubt he was thinking of his own situation and how there were so many secrets surrounding it. Knowledge had been fed to him so very slowly because of the damage it could do to him and to the village, so Ig supposed he could easily draw parallels between that and what he'd just heard. Akatsuki has, evidently, not given you nearly enough credit, Ig Sato Itachi said, a hint of a smile on his face as he regarded the boys in front of him. But if there were some kind of secret surrounding me, what makes you think I'd tell you? Because you'll die today, right here, Ig answered bluntly. I can't let you live, no matter what. And even then, I can sense it, you know. The spider's senjutsu is rather good at sensing stuff and I can sense that you are dying. Slowly, but you are. If you have something to say, you should do it now. The real message there was that if he had something to say to Sajuk, this was his final chance. Ig was sure that Itachi was intelligent enough to realize that. Still, the Uchiha remained silent for a long moment. If you'll hear the final words of a dying man, then I guess I should be grateful for that, Itachi told them, his eyes moving up towards the sky. And, maybe it's selfish of me to ask, but I have a final request from you. Jiji. Naruto mumbled next to him and Ig could only imagine how he was taking the news Itachi had just delivered to them. So, the story was more or less the same, he thought to himself. The Uchiha had really tried to stage a coup in Konoha to take over. According to Itachi, several attempts were made to try and ease the tensions. To try and stop them, but they just wouldn't get over perceived slights and old grudges. To be fair to them, they did have many reasons for their own actions too, but they'd chosen to go through a path that just wouldn't allow for a more peaceful resolution. The good part, if it could be called that, was that Itachi had looked into the incident himself at a later point in his life. Apparently, the original orders hadn't been to kill all of them. Simply a select few to prevent the coup from happening. Apparently, Danzo had decided that was too soft an approach. I'm gonna kill that man, Ig thought to himself. It wasn't a sudden decision though. That had always been in the plans. Danzo may have helped him get as strong as he did, but that didn't excuse all the terrible, horrible things the man had done through his life. No, he needed to die. Ig imagined, morbidly so, that the man may even be proud of that too. I'll have to look more into this though, I need all the info before I can tell Sajuk about this mess as I promised. Ig mused before his eyes strayed to the side to look at Naruto. Better to think about how I'll manage to keep Sajuk's head somewhat clear while I gather facts. And what if the Uchiha still resented Konoha? Well, Ig would have to do his best to stop him from actually doing anything. All their friends lived in and quite liked the village. What Ig could do for him though was get him a new home somewhere else. It wasn't like other villages would say no to an Uchiha, and if the leaf was offended by that, well, too bad. I've kept up with my brother as best I've been able to, Itachi said, held down on the sand by Iji's threads. For a split second, Iji imagined himself in that position for following his own decisions. Itachi had done everything he'd done for his brother and his village. He couldn't imagine doing differently for his own siblings, if not the latter case. If the day came, then Iji would take whatever came to him with pride, and he imagined the Uchiha was doing just that, judging by the peaceful expression on his face. Thank you for taking care of him, for showing him that there are people that care, when I couldn't, Itachi told them. Perhaps the most disturbing thing about the whole conversation, and that was saying something, was that Itachi kept his calm, almost bored look throughout the whole thing. Not once did he show pain or anything else. It was impressive, in a sense, but also very unsettling. Iji didn't even know if he was just like that or if he was just keeping himself under control. The only moments when he showed a semblance of emotion was when talking about Sasuke, really. You. But. Naruto stumbled on his own words, trying to convey a message that Iji knew and Itachi probably guessed. You don't have to die, he said in the end, and Iji smiled sadly. We can take you back to Konoha. Things. There has to be a way to fix this. Naruto, an entire clan died, Iji told him, hating that he had to crush his own brother's wish. There's no way he'll be left out of prison, no matter what. If he's lucky. But he didn't even want to do that. Not entirely accurate, I'd say, Itachi said, a slight, wry smile on his face. Iji was honestly surprised by that. He hadn't expected a dark joke like that from the guy. There were orders. Orders that probably aren't recorded anywhere, Iji told him with a regretful expression. Everyone will deny everything and it'll go nowhere. I'm dying, Itachi told them, and his tone shifted in such a way that both boys turned to give him their full attention. It'll happen and nothing can stop it. I've looked for solutions and found absolutely nothing. Not even Tsunade of the Sun or such names could do something about what's happening to me. Effort put into me would be a waste in the end. Don't say that. Naruto shouted, and Iji closed his eyes. He hated the situation, both for Itachi and for Naruto. There was no way the blonde would let it go, and there was nothing that could be done about the former. The whole situation sucked. If only I had been placed here before all that mess happened. But that was a rabbit hole that Iji refused to go down in. The world he lived in was filled with stories like that. There was just no way he'd have been able to prevent all of them. I only wish I could have talked with Sasuke myself, Itachi finished, ignoring Naruto entirely, and Iji latched onto that. The Uchiha's form dropped resignedly, but his mind started working once more, planning. Kage. Well, he didn't lie about anything. You would have picked up on something with Senjutsu, Kage confirmed, a thoughtful tone in his voice. If you really want to do what you are thinking, there's the spiders. Speaking of, Iji thought, frowning. What happened to my summons? He asked, so out of nowhere that both of them turned to regard him, somewhat surprised. I placed genjutsu on them. Pretty sure Kai's killed a few, the Uchiha answered, tilting his head curiously. It was a bizarre image, really, seeing a man whose body was literally sewed up to keep him from moving talk so casually, really. Speaking of, Iji repeated to himself, using living thread to undo his work now that he knew it was somewhat safe. Also because he didn't have enough chakra to try anything anyway. Good. That'll make things easier, he said, nodding to himself as his eyes narrowed. I'll make your wish come true, but you'll have to disappear from the rest of the world for a bit. Can you heal yourself? I can attack, I replied before a faint mint green glow covered his wounds and started healing them. His chakra was almost depleted, but he had more than enough to heal himself. As he did that, Ig turned, feeling Naruto's gaze on him as he proceeded with his plan. He wasn't too worried though, he expected his brother would approve of his plan. A puff of smoke later, Shirakumo stood in front of him. Ig. What is going on? Last I heard they were saying you ran after, she started, shouting, before seeing the situation around them and stopping abruptly. Ig. I'll send you back in a bit, everything's fine but... Fine. Ig, you lost your arm. The little spider screamed and he grimaced, suddenly keenly aware of the stump that was now his left arm. He'd almost pushed that out of his mind, for the moment at least. Still, he did his best to do so once again. He needed to focus, just a bit more, and he'd be able to rest and deal with things. That's not important right now. The situation is somewhat controlled, but the spiders I'd sent here to Suna to look after Naruto are under a genjutsu or dead. I need your mother to organize a team of them to deal with that mess, Ig said, making the spider go stiff. And I need you to take him to the spider realm and keep him there for a bit. Can you do that for me? Or ask your mother about that? Ig, the elders like you and so does Mom, but... The small spider told him, and he could feel that she was unsure, even without her voice giving it away. I'll ask. Give me a few minutes, she finished then, sighing. With another puff of smoke, she disappeared. Ig, Naruto said then, and Ig didn't even need to look at Naruto to know where his attention was. I'm sorry, attack, I apologized then, having almost finished healing himself. He probably could have been done a lot faster, but he was taking steps to save some chakra. Understandable, considering that his reserves were almost empty. I didn't think you could take me after getting here and taking out Kai'Same. I imagined that would have taken you out of the fight. Ig's never out of the fight, Naruto told the Uchiha, sounding as convinced as he could be. It filled Ig with pride, even if the whole conversation was reminding him of something he'd rather forget for the moment. Even if he should sometimes. Wait. He all but shouted at the end, seemingly thinking of something. Dashing to the side, Ig flinched when he picked up his arm from the sand and immediately placed it into a seal. Immediately, he realized what Naruto thought about and he was afraid of being too hopeful, if he was honest. Crazier things had happened in the world though, surely. It probably won't work, attack, I told them, a touch of regret in his voice. Susanoo wounds are different from normal ones. Naruto didn't say anything, holding on to the seal like it was a lifeline. You are planning to keep me in the spider realm until you can get me to meet Sasuke, attack, I said then. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Ig didn't bother trying to say otherwise, instead raising an eyebrow at Naruto who was staring at him. I think he should hear it all from you. I'll be there to calm him down so he'll listen. From there. Well, you are his brother. You should know how to take it from there, Ig told him. Taking a deep breath in, he let out a weary sigh. The toll of all that had happened was making itself known now that things had calmed down. He wanted nothing else but to find a bed and fall asleep. There were things to do still, unfortunately. I'll be there too, Naruto added, narrowing his eyes at the Uchiha, who was calmly regarding the two of them with black eyes. Then, a ghost of a smile formed on the man's face. I'm glad Sasuke made such good friends, found such good brothers, he said. And who knows? I plan to pull some strings from several medics, Ig told him with a slight smirk. You might even get cured. Cured enough to get thrown into a prison or to continue living as a missing nin. Not sure either would be preferable, Itachi replied, his smile turning bitter. You'd be surprised about your options. And even then, at least you'll live to see Sasuke grow, Ig told him, knowing that was one of the things he would want if he were in that place. He also knew that dying wasn't going to allow that, from personal experience. If you say so, Itachi said, for the first time looking less than perfectly calm and certain about the situation as his eyes narrowed. For the moment, please behave. The spiders shouldn't cause any trouble, but I'd be careful just in case, Ig suggested. Throwing his head back, he was suddenly keenly aware of the sun hitting his body like it was doing its best efforts to make him burst into flames. The fact that he was only wearing pants borrowed from Naruto wasn't helping much either. The sand under his feet burned something fierce. The smoldering heat urged him to just give up. Never mind the bone-deep exhaustion he carried after all he'd had to do. Ig just wanted, he wanted. His right hand, my only hand, moved up to his chest and made a grabbing motion that almost made him flinch once again. There was nothing there. Where something should be, there was nothing anymore. We'll just buy another, Naruto told him, giving him a sad smile when he turned. The important thing is that you are okay. Who cares about a necklace? We can get another just like that one. I guess, Ig replied, but it almost hurt as much as his arm. That necklace had been with him since the first of Naruto's birthdays they'd spent together. If only. But how? His right hand clenched, but the reason was on his left side. His arm, now cut at the elbow, hurt. It burned, like Amaterasu was still enveloped around it, but there was nothing. Hell, he never even felt the flames due to iron will, but it still hurt. Phantom pains, he recognized with a grimace. With a deep breath in, he calmed himself. He needed his head on straight and his thoughts clear. He could have a breakdown later. I think that's enough time, he decided, pausing for a moment to concentrate. And then we go back to Suna. I need to get clothes and somewhere to rest. Good thing he'd given the spiders a few of his things to keep just in case. He'd lost everything he had on him except new ivory to Amaterasu. Even his new protector had been burned away. I'll have to ask the spiders for a new one. They won't be happy I lost it so fast, he thought to himself. Fortunately, anything truly important was kept either in the spider realm too or in his inventory. Only thing that really hurt to lose was the necklace, in all honesty. And the arm, he started before stopping the thought right there, shaking his head. His remaining hand trembled as he moved to summon his spiders and get on with the plan. Oh! Ig Hakai called, and it was strange to hear her voice after she'd been so silent. Once Senjutsu stopped being necessary, she'd stopped working on it and came back. Ig could admit that he'd missed her, if he was honest. I appreciate it, Ig, but you need to pull yourself together for a bit more. An hour before, he'd have hated to hear that. Now though, in Suna, with Naruto safe and Itachi being watched and away, he could relax. It wasn't quite the rest he needed and his body craved, but it was enough for the moment. He had the twins and Sachigumo to lend him the support he needed to keep going. Said Chakra Beast barked at him, sending him the support he so needed at that time. It's not the worst view, is it? He asked in his mind. Sachigumo promptly agreed with him, although he wondered how much she actually liked it. The unending sea of sand that was in front of him, shifting as the dunes were made to dance with the wind. It was quite the contrast to the forest that Tsuchigumo frequented in his mindscape. The insistence of the chakra beast made him wonder if he should add a desert setting in some of the training ground spaces in his fake Konoha. She likes that idea, Kage commented, and Ig nodded to himself. Everything all right, Ig? Naruto asked from his side, and he sounded almost afraid. He guessed that made sense. He must be quite the picture at the moment, with his weary expression and his missing arm. Ig didn't even want to consider the image that was engraved in Naruto's mind from when he joined the fight. He didn't know how he'd have reacted if he'd seen the blonde covered in Amaterasu like that. I'm trying to calm my thoughts, he replied, his voice calm as his eyes remained fixed on the sight before him. Suna isn't as bad as I expected. Could do without the heat though, he said distractedly, thankful for his decision to wear a thin coat open and without a shirt. Freedom it might give, which was why he'd started doing that after Kakuzu, but it also helped quite well with the weather of the sand village. It's not. People aren't that bad, I guess. I don't think I like the view all that much, but it's still good, Naruto told him. He also heard him swallow, but the blonde didn't add anything for a long moment. I miss Konoha and the team though. I'm sure they'll be on their way, my team too, Ig mused. And if he had to bet, Konoha would do their best to pull some Jounin from somewhere to cover for their Jinchuriki. With one more Akatsuki pair dealt with and with another hurt, he hoped it would be enough to ease some things for people. Nagato, Kanon, Obito, Zetsu, he thought to himself, already thinking how he'd go about dealing with them. The worst part was that Pain would get 6 new bodies before doing anything, and that meant that Ig would have no idea which was which. On top of that, he'd given away that he knew about their powers, and if he didn't, Nagato had to at least be wary of him now. The next battle would be more complicated, that was for sure. Sometimes, it feels like the goal isn't getting any closer, he mused, sighing. We'll get there, Ig Hakai told him softly, getting an agreeing bark from Tsuchigumo. How long do you think it'll be until then? Naruto asked, and he sounded nervous. Not that Ig could blame him, really, with all the shit show they'd just had to deal with. A few days at best. Around a week at most, Ig replied, checking with the twins to make sure he had his numbers right. It wasn't like he'd been paying all that much attention during the trip. Ig. Yeah. Thanks for coming for me. Nothing to thank me for, Naruto, really. Ig waved off with his remaining hand and the slightest of smiles. Even when he'd have used his right hand before anyway, using it at all reminded him that he only had one now. Nothing we can do about this, Kyo herself had told him just a few hours ago when they arrived and made their way to the medics of Suna. They'd been professional, even, perfectly so. Hakai had even come through for him to check with Senjutsu, and they didn't seem to have lied. I thought I'd die alone, Naruto told him, making his mind focus on the present once more. The blonde looked away from him, towards the desert, much like Ig had a moment before. Today and before. Well, before. Over my dead body. I'd rather there were no dead bodies, Naruto commented with a bitter smile that spoke about how much he believed that. Just, thank you. Don't mention it, Ig told him with a smile that was much more honest than any he'd given that day. What are brothers for, eh? Yeah, Naruto nodded, grinning just as widely as he'd ever done. Brothers. Oh. Of course you'd find a ramen stand in here, Ig commented with a smile as he entered the establishment his brother had dragged him to. Why am I even surprised at all? I found 3, Naruto corrected, looking like a child in a candy store. The blonde was looking around as if this was the best, most fun, most impressive place to be in the entire village. IG wondered what the people of Suna would take from that if they had a better read on him like IG did. But this is the best one. Evidently, someone wasn't as offended about the fact that the place was so much better regarded than the rest of the village and that person was the owner that IG could see cooking. The women all but preened, shooting the pair a confident smile that made IG chuckle to himself. From the smell in the establishment though, she had reasons to be proud though. Two of the usual, please. Naruto called loudly, to which nobody reacted. IG looked around and people were going about their day as if his loud mouth of a brother was a normal occurrence. He probably was, yeah, but seeing Naruto in public being so open and accepted was almost new. It was a bittersweet observation to make that his brother was more welcome in Suna than he was in Konoha. Although, to be fair, the situation back home had been improving for years by then. It seemed that a little improvement to Naruto's more obnoxious tendencies had gone a long way. Which was also annoying to IG, since the village itself had been the one to cause that. You haven't been here all that long, he pointed out after a moment of looking around. Naruto was oddly quiet, he'd noticed. How do you have a usual already? How often do you come here? Well, you see, I was trying to find good places to eat and, well, one thing led to the other and. The blonde stammered and IG's expression turned more and more unimpressed as he went on. And you've been eating here almost every day, I'm betting, he finished for the blonde, who instantly brought a hand up and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. He could only sigh at that. I thought I taught you better. I know you love the stuff, but you have to eat varied stuff, Naruto, he told him, something that he'd repeated many times throughout his life. That last thing might be why his brother seemed to be happy instead of ashamed or anything. My brother is an idiot, IG thought, even though he was smiling too. They have varied stuff. That you wouldn't have tried if I hadn't noticed. This is all you eat, a new voice joined in then, and IG looked at the cook placing two bowls before them. IG also noticed the way she looked at Naruto. It seemed that the blonde had managed to make a friend, as usual. And the usual? IG asked, turning towards the woman. He noticed, with some amusement, that both bowls were different. The usual is whatever ramen I think will give him different things instead of the miso ramen he'd ask for all the time, the woman told him with a chuckle that he shared. I take it you are the famous IG. His brother. He'll never shut up about you. Only half the good things are true and none of the bad ones, he said instantly. But yeah, I'm IG Sata, nice to meet you. IG Sata. The woman whispered, frowning. For a moment, he wondered if she knew of him. He was starting to become that kind of person, especially in ninja villages. Fortunately, she seemed to be civilian enough to just shrug and keep going. Yuka Morita, nice to meet you. Now, I'll leave you two to enjoy the meal. You know what to do when you are done, she said, going back to cooking. As she did, IG turned to give Naruto a raised eyebrow. The blonde laughed awkwardly. And then IG sighed and looked at the ramen in front of him. Miso ramen, which he guessed was fair. Naruto's usual would surely be that if he actually got to choose every time. He took a deep breath in and prepared himself to eat. Picking up the chopsticks, he moved slowly. Next to him, he saw Naruto flinch as he moved. IG just rolled his eyes at him and focused on the food. It had been a whole day since the whole mess. Sleeping and eating something had done wonders for him, but he was far from all right. Even Tsuchigumo was recovering from all the energy she'd spent, and Hakai had been very active after all the time she'd spent with Senjutsu. Kage had even offered to practice some more on that, to take the next turn instead of her. Back to the point though, the blonde still hadn't understandably gotten used to seeing him use wires instead of his hands for stuff like eating. In this case, he used them to hold the bowl while he used the chopsticks with his one hand. It was strange, really. He'd used wires for lots of things like that. Hell, he'd probably used wires to manipulate New Ivory just as much as he'd used his hands. However, those mundane tasks had never been done like that, and he found the act incredibly strange. This is good, he commented, after trying the first bit of food. I know, right? Naruto replied hesitantly. Ig sighed, but decided to continue eating. It wasn't like he could do anything about his lack of arm at the moment. The wires would have to do for the moment. Maybe even permanently, but he had some ideas to take care of that particular problem. One of them had been to fashion himself an arm made with ninja wire. With all his training using living thread, surely he could manage that, right? And the answer was yes, but it was incredibly strange and complex to do. It just wasn't worth the effort in the end. Might as well just use the threads separately than go through all that trouble. If all else failed though, he might come back to that idea. Anything to try and fill the hole on his being that he was now permanently feeling on his left side. That's it, guy, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.